Hello, and welcome to another episode of Archives and Anchovies, the podcast about whatever it is I feel like talking about that week. This week, I am trying a video podcast for the first week. I should say for the first time. It is something to where I am really trying to expand not only my abilities, but also to try to figure out some of these technology things and see if it works and see if it's something that is feasible and see if it's something that might be fun. So I might be a little more nervous this time just because I'm not used to seeing myself on camera. So I really appreciate any comments, feedback that you might have. Just getting the whole thing set up, trying to find a spot in my house, trying to figure out the lighting. It's all been a challenge, but here we are. And, this is something that's pretty exciting for me. I've enjoyed doing the audio podcast, but thought I'd take it to the next level this week and see how it goes. I have some notes over on my left side. So there's going to be some times where maybe I'm not as polished as some of the veteran podcasters you see that they're not looking at their notes. So you're just going to have to bear with me as I go through this. I just have a pretty simple setup. This is actually going through my iPhone with a microphone, and then I have my iPad just to my left so that I can have some notes. Today's episode is actually pretty cool. I was thinking about some of the things that I talked about in a previous episode where I talk about being ready for a gig and showing up for a gig. And I talked a little bit about some of the travel things that I've had to endure and started me thinking about instruments. Today was, or I should say, this week was new bass day for me. I got a new bass and I'm really enjoying it, trying to figure out some of my travel things so that maybe I can have a little bit easier time traveling. So got a 4-string headless bass, but started thinking about how the electronics in it was working, and it made me start thinking about Leo Fender. So Leo Fender was really the godfather of the electric bass. So this episode is dedicated to him. It's something that is going to go through his history. He's had several companies. Excuse me. We'll figure out and see if that can be edited later. I have no idea. But he's had several companies that he built instruments for. Of course, people know Fender guitars, and we are going to take a look at all of the other things that he also produced. So our story kind of starts with, thinking about Leo Fender and one company. So he had Fender guitars, world renowned, world known, but there's a lot more to it. Something that really started as an idea for Leo was, early in the 1940s. So, and I'm going to be specific to the bass guitar. So maybe at a future episode, I'll do something with electric guitars and how he changed the electric guitar world forever as well. But for now, I'm basically going to just talk about bass guitars. So in the early 1940s, Leo Fender is running a radio repair shop. He's in Fullerton, California. He's already started making electric guitars. So the Telecaster was kind of the first guitar that came out, and he was gaining some traction with that as well. But Leo kind of noticed something interesting about when he went to a live performance. He was seeing, the electric guitar and the drums on stage, and we were still seeing the large upright bass. So actually, just to my rear here, I have an upright, but it's an electric upright. At that point in time, they didn't have electric uprights. So one of the challenges that they faced was that the upright was having now a problem competing with the drums and also competing with the new amplified electric guitars that were coming out. And so Leo had something on his mind to be able to combat that. So he basically noticed that also the bass takes up quite a bit of space. It's not easily transportable. I was actually a jazz musician in the 90s. That's the 1990s for all of you people saying the 1900s these days. But I was a jazz musician in the 90s, and I would stick an upright into. I had a hatchback car, and it was quite amusing because the front of the neck was sticking all the way up by the windshield, if you can imagine. Then it kind of went sideways this way, and then finally ended up all the way back in the hatchback with all the seats down. It was definitely a struggle. So bass players for a long time have struggled to be heard over, the drums and the guitar. And in the 1940s, when it was just uprights, it was something that he thought he could help with. So the upright bass, double bass, had been basically the foundation for music for centuries, going back to, if you listen to my episode about Mozart and Hamilton, even Mozart and even in Bach's time, they were the foundation for all the music. They designate what chord is being played. They designate the whole band as far as the orchestration goes. So they're really the support. So being an acoustic bass meant it was really hard to amplify without getting feedback to the level that they needed for the rest of the musicians on the stage. Also, it was the technique was very specific to the early jazz and early rock that was out. So you couldn't really have somebody that wasn't highly skilled in the electric bass, or sorry, in the upright bass playing it. So it wasn't something that there was transferable skills there. So Leo Fender saw an opportunity, and he thought, what if I could create an electric bass that was compact? It could be amplified cleanly and could be played by anybody that played guitar, especially that maybe could cross over as an instrument or use it as a crossover so that they could play it and make themselves more versatile. So obviously now you have people that play all kinds of instruments. They are multi-tooled, as they would say. I remember seeing Harry Connick Jr. Several years ago, and he was all over the stage. He went from singing to playing the keyboards to playing the drums to playing the guitar. He definitely had that aspect. So in 1951, however, that really wasn't as commonplace. So it was pretty revolutionary that he thought, hey, I could make something to where guitarists and bassists could both play kind of the same instrument. So as we go to 1951, basically he changed music forever by introducing the precision bass. So it was aptly named the precision bass because, as you can't really see it because it's a little bit fuzzy, but a fretless bass, the intonation on it is a little bit subject to the player. You can get as close to it as possible, but it sounds a little bit out of tune, and that's a cool vibe. Sometimes, a lot of times, jazz is a little bit that way, so it fits that music. But the precision bass actually ended up having frets on it, which made the tuning specific. So you couldn't miss a note. As long as you fretted the correct note, of course, it would be in tune. So they tuned it to A440, which is the standard. So A440, just meaning the A above middle C on a piano, runs at 4,400 hertz or cycles per second. And that is the kind of standard tuning that we use today. So they tuned it to that so that every note that was played and fretted correctly would be in the correct intonation. So that's where the name precision came from, because it was much more precise than the upright bass, and you could basically play all of your notes with precision. So the interesting part about it, as far as being something so groundbreaking, is that the design was really simple. It looked like a big guitar, so it was something that was a little bit longer, had a solid body. It was made of ash or alder at the time when they had it. It had typically a maple neck at that time, and it originally had a single coil pickup. So I could do an entire episode on pickups. In fact, I was watching a Scott's bass lesson video just a couple days ago, actually, where he and Ian, if you haven't seen Scott's bass lessons and you're a bass player, you're really missing out. They have fantastic content. And if you have a chance to go take a look at their stuff that's online, it's pretty amazing. But they were doing an in-depth thing on pickups, and I could do the same thing. But the single coil pickup, basically, it had a coil wrapped basically one time, and it had a single pole for each one of the strings. So now today there's all kinds of different pickups, but basically at this time it was a single coil. So the bass also had 4 strings just to match what an upright bass had. So E, A, D, and G were the tuning. But unlike an upright, you could put it over your shoulder. You could set it down easily. It was easily transportable, and you could protect it as well. So what Leo did in his designs, he was also very cognizant of the way that the upright players, they basically had to play this way. What was the scale for kind of the average person? So he made it 34 inches, which is pretty industry standard today. There are some 35-inch scale basses. Now there are ones that have fan frets, which is actually one of the basses that I just bought. And it makes the lower strings longer, kind of like a piano. If you ever look at it, if the piano strings towards the left side, towards the left hand, are much longer. As it gets higher, they're shorter. So that's a design that's today. But for the most part, people still use kind of the standard 34-inch scale. So what made that really nice is it was very comfortable for people to play. It was kind of a standard that made it to where a lot of people in the mass majority could play it. So the original 51 precision bass, as I said, had that the pickup that was very simple, but he being Leo Fender, was always wanting to improve his design. So in 1957, he made some pretty significant changes. So he redesigned the body. He made it much more comfortable to play. So if you've ever played a bass or a guitar, you know it sits on your body. How it contours and how it shapes around your body is important for how it feels, especially if you're wearing it for, a couple of hours. When we do our shows, we have 2-hour shows, wearing that bass for 2 hours. So comfort's important. He replaced that single coil pickup with what is now the split pickup. So the pickup is kind of there's one for the lower strings and there's one for the upper strings. So that was a massive update. What was nice about that is single coil pickups have a tendency to be able to pick up interference and have a hum. This allowed and eliminated that particular pain point of having those, annoying types of hums and buzzes and things that came from that single coil pickup. So the split P gave a thicker, punchier tone as well. And it really did become the sound of the bass guitar for quite some time. If you listen to Motown records, rock classics, and everything in between, it really became kind of the gold standard for what a tone would sound like. When I roll up to a gig, if I have my P bass, I know is exactly what's going to happen on this red bass that's right here. Actually, if I do that, it kind of pulls it into there. That's a P bass with a split coil pickup. It's a 2008 American standard P bass. So there's probably another episode of American-made P basses versus Japan-made P basses versus P basses made in Mexico. I could do a whole nother episode, but that's not what we're covering here. We're talking about Leo Fender, so that's another sidebar that I could do. The precision bass basically was a game changer. If you think of Motown, James Jamerson, probably one of the most admired bass players from the era. He used a P bass to create all those, Motown records. He played with one finger, is pretty amazing. Donald Duck Dunn laid down grooves with Booker T and the MGs. Also, if you've ever seen the movie Blues Brothers, that is Donald Duck Dunn. He plays a precision bass, so pretty common. And then most session artists chose a P bass. Carol Kay, she recorded thousands of hits, probably one of the most legendary session bassists ever. A lot of her records were done on a P bass as well. And there's many, many more. In the rock vein, Steve Harris, from Iron Maiden, he also used a P bass. So there is a tremendous amount of artists that use this P bass. So what came next, however, as Leo Fender always tried to improve, was he just that was his brain. So you would think that he would rest on his laurels. He created the precision bass, and it was probably one of the greatest instruments made, and groundbreaking. But in 1960, he actually introduced another bass, and that was the jazz bass. So the jazz bass, it was designed kind of to appeal to a different market. He was really targeting it and marketing it for jazz musicians. But what was really interesting is the way that it provided a lot more versatility than the P bass. It ended up being, people that would use it for going forward for rock and roll, for jazz, for funk, for pop. It really became one of the most common basses that you can see. Changed it a lot because added 2 pickups in much different positions. And also you were able to blend those pickups and be able to create a much more wide variety of sounds. The P bass was pretty simple. 2 knobs. It had a volume knob, and then it had a tone knob. You could make it darker or brighter. The jazz bass introduced where you had basically a blend of each one of the pickups individually that you could put things into. So the jazz bass was really named after something so it could be marketed, but it really never, took off until we got to players like Jaco Pastorius. So if everybody here is a bass player, you obviously know Jaco's story. But for those of you that aren't, Jaco was an amazing jazz player. He used a Fender bass, Fender jazz bass. He actually ended up taking the frets out of it to use it as a fretless bass, but inspired, thousands and hundreds of thousands of bass players all over the world because he is such a well known and renowned bass player, and he really just took the bass to a whole new level. And he did that with a jazz bass. So, my biggest influence and my favorite bass player is Geddy Lee. He went through a lot of different basses. He used a jazz bass for a long time, used a Rickenbacker for a while, used a Steinberger, also used a wall bass, but he reverted back in his later tours, probably the last 10 years, to strictly seeing a bunch of different types of jazz basses. He has a massive collection, has an amazing book on the bass guitar, but he will always seems to, I should say, he'll always seem to go back to the jazz bass. And so one of my favorite influencers. So, when slap got introduced by Larry Graham, that wasn't on a jazz bass, but probably the signature sound was Marcus Miller. Marcus Miller took a slap at that point to some new heights and basically kind of made the sound of the jazz bass be what it was for people wanting to get a tone for slap bass, and the jazz bass was kind of the gold standard. So if you think about that, by the mid 60s, Leo Fender had created two of the most important electric basses and designs today, the P bass and the jazz bass. And they really are still the templates for most of the guitars that are out there. I mentioned Scott's bass lessons a little bit ago. And one of the things that is interesting about it is that episode where they talk about the pickups. I think Scott Devine actually talks about how he puts things into two categories. He says it's either a jazz bass or a P bass, and then they have some variations, but it's still that same design all the way back then. So going a little further ahead in time, I mentioned at the beginning that Leo Fender had multiple companies. And so what ended up happening is in 1965, he sold Fender Electric Instruments to CBS. The amount was approximately $13 million. And there's estimates for now anywhere from that would be 95 million to 130 million in today's market. So really not too bad for a guy that really started in a radio repair shop and creating designs in I think of it as like a garage or a small shop. So pretty cool. Leo ended up selling Fender guitars, not because his love of making instruments went away or he thought of, I just want to sell and retire. He actually had some health concerns. So he was suffering from a staph infection that wasn't really properly treated. He thought that he may not have too much longer to live. And so he sold the company to CBS. There's some things that I saw online that reportedly once he actually recovered from it, he tried to get the company back, but CBS had already said, we're probably making a bunch of money and we aren't going to sell it back to you. But in the sale, probably the most critical piece in that sale for Leo Fender is that he actually signed a non-compete clause. So he was not allowed to sell anything, design anything, release anything for 10 years. So what he did was he became a consultant. He worked with other companies, tinkered with some upcoming designs in his workshop, and basically waited for that non-compete to come out. So in the 1970s, once that non-compete had expired, he came out with his second version of basses, which were the Music Man basses. So he partnered with two former employees, Forrest White and Tom Walker. He created the new company, and it was actually initially called Trisonics, but it came to be known as Music Man shortly after. Music Man really became a company by making amplifiers because at the time that they did it, he was still under the non-compete clause. So it was something to where he was able to get around some of the things, but he was still able to design. I'll talk a little bit later. He was an engineer, so that was his trade. But by 1976, he was free of that non-compete clause, and he was cleared to design guitars and basses again. And that's exactly what he did. The Music Man StingRay bass really became iconic. It was introduced in 1976. It was Leo Fender's new first bass design, basically in over a decade. So people had used Precisions, Jazzes, all those types of things. There are other manufacturers that now basically copied his works, but this was his first new bass. He had not lost his touch at all. So the StingRay was truly a revolutionary thing in his own right, just as much as the precision bass and the jazz bass were. The StingRay really had some innovations that made it revolutionary. First, it was something that was active electronics. So previously, the P basses and the jazz basses were passive electronics, so there was no battery or anything amplifying the signal. So when he came out with the StingRay, he built a preamp that was powered by a 9-volt battery. So of course, something that was totally revolutionary at the time. It gave the bass not only more output, but it also gave it more tonal control and a much more consistent sound. So if you've ever owned an older instrument, you know that there's some spots and some dead spots that are on those instruments that give it their character, but you know where they are. So sometimes you have to avoid them, or if you want a particular sound, you can play it right there. But the StingRay, with its active preamp, was able to make things much more consistent, and also provided a 3-band EQ. So you could have bass, treble, and mid control or blends as well was still on there. So it definitely had a much larger palette for tonal capabilities. The sound was pretty aggressive, though. It was also modern. It was definitely punchy. It was perfect for the funk that was going on at the time, the disco that was going on at the time, and even the late 70s rock music. Bernard Edwards of Chic used a StingRay to create some of the most iconic disco bass lines ever. Louis Johnson laid down the bass on Michael Jackson's Thriller album with the Music Man. Tony Levin made the StingRay a prog rock staple with King Crimson and also Peter Gabriel. And probably one of the most well-known things, if you know Queen at all, another one bites the dust. John Deacon played a StingRay on that and recorded it on that. And also the most infamous Queen concert, the Live Aid concert, you can see him rocking a StingRay on that. So there are a lot of artists that switched to a StingRay as it was something new. Leo also then, after the hit of the StingRay, introduced the Sabre bass in 1978. So that featured 2 humbucking pickups and even more tonal options, but the StingRay remained the flagship. We talked about pickups a lot because that is a lot of innovation in basses. So the StingRay, where if you can see this bass right here, not really a great picture, but it's dead center. The StingRay bass actually put the pickup very, very near the bridge. So it was also something that was a completely kind of different design. So the Music Man design showed Leo had, evolved as designer and had actually wanted to improve on the precision bass and the jazz bass and their popularity. He was incorporating a bunch of new technologies at the time, active electronics, new pickups. He basically still wanted to have the core principles that he founded the P bass and the jazz bass for to make a really great instrument, something that plays great, and they're also built to last. If you've ever picked up an old StingRay, they weigh a ton. They are solid pieces of wood. Some of the P basses and jazz basses may be a little bit lighter, but they are really designed to last. So the thing with Music Man that is either fortunate or unfortunate, depending on how you look at it, it didn't last a long time. So his relationship with Music Man was really only till 1979. There was a lot of disputes with the business partners, and Leo felt he wasn't being given enough of the freedom in the design decisions that he desired. So Leo at this point is 70 years old. So if you think about that, he's 70 and he decides to completely start over. He leaves Music Man, and in 1980, Leo Fender and his old friend George Fullerton founded a completely new company, GNL. So the initials stood for George and Leo. And this is where things get really interesting for bass players. So Leo and GNL, as he saw this as his coup de grace. So he wanted to make the ultimate instruments that he could. So take everything he'd learned over, the 4 decades of creating, engineering, and designing basses, and make this kind of his definitive, signature. He often called G&L basses the best instruments he ever built and ever made. So let's talk about some of the innovations that Leo brought to G&L, as we've talked about some of the others. So these particular instruments featured what Leo called the magnetic field design pickups. So the L1000 and L2000 series specifically, they had these advanced humbucker pickups, and the humbucker basically is, I always say it bucks the hum. So as we talked about a long time ago with the single coil pickups, we had hum and we had some interference. The humbuckers, when they were designed, basically eliminated those types of hums and things like that, but they were much, much more powerful as well than anything that he had designed before. So they were extremely versatile. They had series, parallel switching, active, passive modes. So what that means is that more tonal options for the bass player, more tonal options for the musician playing. You could switch different things and put things in different positions to allow different tonal options that suited the needs. So the L2000s particularly became a favorite among session players, so people that were recording. We talked about James Jamerson, we talked about Carol Kay playing the P basses, but the nice thing is you could take a G&L bass and you could cover anything. So you could cover things that a P bass would cover, you could cover things that a jazz bass would cover, plus a lot more. And you could be a little bit more innovative with people that requested a particular kind of tone for a particular song or a particular recording. Then in this series, also, as far as the G&L basses, he had a legacy series, the SB1 and the SB2. These were kind of the refined takes on his classic design. So when we look at the P bass and we look at the jazz bass, he kind of redefined, essentially improved the versions of the precision bass and the jazz bass as well. And then he also came out with an innovation where he had a jazz pickup and a P bass pickup, both on the same bass, and you could switch between them. So you kind of tried to get the best of both worlds. You could have that precision tone. If you just put only that pickup on, you could have try to get the Jocko tone by only having the bridge pickup, or you could use them both and you'd have something that was kind of similar. So one final bass that he created was the ASAT bass. That had a semi-hollow design, so always trying to innovate. He decided to make one that wasn't a solid body guitar, and various other models. He also pushed the boundaries of what bass could be at that point in time. But each one of these incorporated some type of new idea, some refinement, and basically what he had learned over decades and decades of designing and building and constructing basses. So what's pretty fascinating about G&L, he was still innovating into his 70s. So he introduced new bridges. So that's the part at the very back of the bass that holds the strings. He designed them to have better sustain. So that's the length of time that a note will play. So the bridge definitely makes a huge impact on that. And he never really stopped trying to make things better. So somebody that could have, somebody that could have just stopped, taken his, $13 million from selling Fender to CBS, could have given up for 10 years, not done it anymore. He decided he never wanted to stop improving. So again, that's why he's kind of called the godfather of the bass guitar. So what is it about Fender's approach that allowed him to create such iconic instruments and, last along those decades? Well, primarily, Leo was an engineer. He wasn't particularly great at playing the guitar. He wasn't particularly great at playing the bass, but it gave him an advantage to where his bias of his own playing would not be in there. So he listened to what players wanted, what players needed. He approached problems from a practical engineering brain. How can we make this louder? How can we, give more sustain? How can we make something more comfortable to play? How can we, improve the range of the instrument? How many frets it had? How can we make it stay in tune? It's all of those things that he listened to players and people that were using them, day in and out, night in and out, whether it be studio or live. And he took that, processed it through his engineer brain, not his musician brain, and was able to create these things. So he also believed just in continuous improvement. So he never thought anything was perfect. Even after he made the precision bass, and that became the standard, he kept refining it. He was changing the pickups, he was changing, the tuning pegs, he was changing the bridges, and then later on, he incorporated, active electronics and things. And then at GNL, he pushed even further with totally new pickup designs and switching options and making things much more complex and allowing the user to be able to tailor their sound to how they wanted something to sound. So the other thing is that he never forgot about the working musician. So he built these instruments for them to be used, for them to be played, for them to be abused. These weren't art pieces and collectibles. Nowadays, you have a bunch of boutique basses are out there, and they look gorgeous, and they have all of these diamonds, and they have gold plated hardware and things like that. Leo Fender, really, his designs were to be used by the people that would use these night in and night out and do the performance. They wanted to be able to survive the road. They wanted them to be maintainable. That was another thing that was really interesting when I was doing the research, how they could be, the parts could be fixed, the parts could be adjusted, things could be handled on the road, so that if you're having a problem with something, you can actually just make some minor adjustments, or you have a tech that can do the setups and things like that. So they were easily maintainable as well, and accessible. And as you see throughout history, so like truss rods, for instance, and things like that, where they are sometimes hidden, he eventually developed ways for them to be a little bit more accessible and a little bit easier to work on. So pretty cool as far as that goes. So this brings us to 1991. Leo Fender passed away in 1991 at the age of 81. But, his influence on the music of, basically from 50 to now is unmistakable. There is nobody that has probably produced more innovation in a particular instrument than Leo did for the bass guitar. The electric bass didn't exist before him. There were some early types of basses that they tried to electrify that did actually predate him, but he basically is the father of the bass guitar for all intents and purposes. And it became virtually the foundation for all of the music that we listen to today. So if you are, after you listen to my amazing podcast about this and you decide to go listen to some music, you probably are listening to something that has a foundation in the bass based on these designs by Leo Fender. So if you go into any music store today, you'll definitely see evidence of legacy. There's Fender everywhere. There's Music Man everywhere. There's GNL. But even those three companies, all the companies that are out there right now that are making instruments are kind of based on his design. So the body shapes, the 34-inch scale neck, the bolt-on neck. So there's a couple of different types of necks. So some bolt-on, some are actually carved out of a single piece of wood. But the bolt-on neck designs, the basic pickup configurations, as I talked about a little bit earlier, are all of his designs. Even like on these boutique basses that I was just mentioning, they have, they might be $10,000 for this boutique bass, but the pickup design and placement is still based on what Leo Fender put together all the way back in the early 50s. So Leo was absolutely amazing for the bass. And across the brands, Fender, Music Man at GNL, he created instruments that represent definitely different eras and different philosophies, as most construction things do and engineering do. He continued his core values, though, wanted to innovate all the time. So he was always trying to improve the instruments that he was making and improve the sound quality. So it is really attributed to him where we are as an electric bass player. So if you are a bass player, you've definitely been influenced by Leo Fender's designs. Whether you play one of his specific instruments, whether that be a Fender bass or a Music Man or a GNL, the designs are still his. The sound of the electric bass really is the sound that Leo created, basically from Motown to metal, from jazz to hip hop to rap to all these things. Leo made these basses and he laid the foundation literally for these. So I hope you got to learn something about Leo Fender today. that's really our show for today. Leo's story really just reminds me when I pick up an instrument that how far it's come in the 70 years or so that since it was introduced. And, you don't necessarily have to be a virtuoso player. Today, instruments are also much more affordable today than they probably were back then. You can get some high quality instruments for fairly inexpensive that allow you to start. I highly encourage anybody that wants to start music to do so. It's a blessing that you will have for the rest of your life. You'll enjoy it for the rest of your life. Can be frustrating at times, but there's something magical about being able to create beautiful music out of empty air. So that's what we try to do, and it's a lot of fun. So Leo Fender, for the bass player, never stopped improving his instruments. Just like any musician, you never stop trying to improve your technique, your playing, your musicality. It's something that we are just ingrained to do. So the heart and the spirit of Leo Fender lives in the instruments that he put together and all the instruments going forward. So hope you enjoyed this episode. Hope you were entertained. This is the first video episode that I've done, and hopefully I did okay. I definitely would love for you to leave any feedback, comments, things that I can improve, things that you might have liked. But until we meet again, I appreciate you listening to Archives and Anchovies, and I hope you have an amazing day. Thanks so much.